Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Career Pathways presentation. Just want to thank Beth Schill, who's on right now, who's organizing this series, and thank you all for coming. I am the Health Science and Tech Industry Advisor and colleague, and I'll be leading the panel. We have three wonderful panelists today. Basically, the format, I'm going to ask them a few questions, just mostly about their career journey and their day-to-day. But we really want to take a lot of time for your own questions. So we will be watching chat. If you want to add that in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and just speak up, that works too after those questions. And then at the end, we will likely do some kind of breakout session to talk through just different skills that are important in this industry, in the health related industry. And you can break out with the different panelists to talk more with them. So that's the format. Feel free to ask any questions throughout in the chat. But I'm just going to kick it off and just, if each panelist could quickly give a brief introduction with your name, where you work, your job title, and Georgetown graduate information, and then we'll go to career journey after that. So Sunny, how about you start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Nice to chat with you guys. My name is Sunny Huang, and I'm currently a Senior Manager of Strategic Innovation at Becton Dickinson, which is one of the leading medtech companies. So it's out of New Jersey, where many pharma and medtech companies tend to be. I focus on basically any kind of strategic mandates that come out of the CEO's office. So it's very project-driven work, which is comfortable for me because I grew up in consulting. I was with BCG prior to this role, and before that with PwC, and focus in healthcare for all of my career. I graduated with a healthcare management and policy degree from NHS in 2010, so 10 years ago. So it seemed like a logical path to take, focusing on healthcare, and it really is my passion. So happy to answer, any questions related to the career path that I've taken, whether it's in consulting or kind of in-house strategic positions.
Mm-hmm. Great. Laura, do you go next?
Hi, I'm Laura Puglisi. I'm a Senior Manager for Consumer Health at Memorial Sloan Kettering, which is a cancer hospital and research center in New York. So I oversee a portfolio of work focused on like patient experience and digital health. So that's like stuff like remote monitoring, patient-reported outcomes, patient portal. And I was Georgetown College Anthropology and English majors, class of 2008.
Great. Sahil.
Hey everyone, I'm Sahil Chaudhry. I graduated from the School of Nursing and Health Studies, like Sunny, in the Healthcare Management and Policy program. I currently serve as a Senior Health Policy Advisor to the Chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee in the U.S. House of Representatives, where I advise the member on everything from domestic health to global health programs. So we've been very involved with the coronavirus pandemic response right now up on the Hill. But other than that, work on everything from Medicare and Medicaid issues to public health issues like the opioid epidemic. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Great. So then if each of you could share a little bit about, I guess, part of your decision making and how you got to where you are, and perhaps to right now, just with where we're at, like how you found the work that you found as well as a part of your career journey. And yeah, we'll keep it at that for now, and then I'll ask later.
I can start. So, being a healthcare management policy major, I knew that I wanted to do something with healthcare, obviously. And I actually had shadowed a doctor for a while because I worked at Georgetown Hospital during my undergrad years. And I found that I wanted to actually focus a bit more on the macro problems. So then kind of thinking through that process, I realized that perhaps consulting it would be the step that makes sense as my first step foray into the working world, in that, one, it gives me access to how many different health systems work because I first focused on provider work, and second, I was able to see many different leadership styles, not only from the partners that I work for, but also from how the client leaders lead their organizations, and thirdly, kind of focusing on the macro issues that impact many different health systems, but that's specific to that particular client that we're working for. Those kind of three factors kind of tied nicely in consulting. So I decided to enter into consulting world. I pivoted into a firm that focused a bit more on strategy with Boston Consulting Group. And there I broadened my perspective for not only providers, but for med tech and pharma as well. And that was my intent, that I wanted to kind of touch many different parts and players within healthcare beyond providers. And I was able to get that experience at BCG. My current employer, Becton Dickinson, actually was my customer when I was at BCG. And I really admired the way, the innovation was at the forefront of Becton Dickinson. The way that folks were so dedicated to cause of finding cures for and providing technology necessary to cure lives and across the world, and that impact really spoke to me. So I pivoted into the role that I have now. There's also personal reasons as well, to be completely frank. At this stage of life, I was kind of sick of being on the road Monday through Thursday. That's part of consulting life, and I think there's many pros to that as well. But I was ready to get off the road, and this job allows me to do that. So that was actually a factor in considering moving to an in-house role as well.
I can go next if that'd be helpful. So my journey into health policy with the federal government kind of started actually in one of my classes in the HCP program, Politics of Healthcare, my sophomore year. My professor had actually worked on the Hill as a health policy advisor, similar to what I'm doing right now, except for a senator, during the passage of the Affordable Care Act, which I'm sure some of you may know is the landmark healthcare bill that was passed during the Obama administration that expanded coverage to millions of people. So after that, I kind of got bit by the health policy bug, interned actually in the Obama administration at the Department of Health and Human Services, in this really cool office that kind of interfaced between then Secretary Burwell and the Hill. So I got exposure to the Hill dynamics. From there, hopped over to the Senate side and did an internship with the Senate Health Committee and just fell in love. And like right after graduation, went back to the Hill as a health policy aide and kind of got the opportunity to move up and take on different responsibilities up to the point now where I get to advise the member directly and be their principal health policy advisor.
And I think I took a much less direct road to where I am today. If you told me in college that I'd be working for a hospital, I probably would have not really believed that. But when I was in Georgetown, I graduated kind of expecting and wanting to work in international development. And I graduated in 2008. So right in the peak of the recession, when it actually was really, really hard to find a job, which I think a lot of you might be able to relate to now. But I ended up, being unable to find work right away and deciding to take a 3-year position in South Africa, working with a nonprofit there that I came on board to do monitoring and evaluation for. So, sorry, I have a little bit of background noise. So after 3 years working with that group, I realized I needed to go back to school to kind of advance my career, and I pivoted to public health. So the work that I was doing in South Africa really made me realize that healthcare was such an essential part of people kind of gaining advancement, especially in places like South Africa. So I went back to get an MPH, came back to the US, and then after graduation, I ended up taking a job with a research consultancy that specialized in healthcare innovation. And that really kind of opened up this whole new world to me where, I started out doing research on things like really low tech interventions, say for how pregnant women in Ghana could benefit from health literacy interventions through phone. And that really evolved into looking at more high-tech innovation here in the US. But really the focus of that work was around running research, looking at how products are designed, understanding how technology can really work for people and help them achieve benefits to health behaviors or health outcomes. So after a few years of that, I moved on to Sloan Kettering, where, right now I oversee this portfolio of products and really pull together pieces of the business strategy, what do these products need to accomplish for the organization, the design, how do these products really get designed to best serve the patients that use them and the clinicians that need to use them. And then also the product development itself. So how do you funnel that information back into developers and back into product teams to really deliver technologies that can serve our constituents. So it's a mix of really pulling together both the strategy and the production to serve our patients to make sure that they can really benefit from their care through technology.
That's great. Laura, maybe just keep going with you for now. If you could share more of it. So what does that look like? I hear what you're saying. You're looking at technologies and how they can benefit other people, but what does your day-to-day look like? Like, what skills are you using? Just what does a week look like? And I know it'll vary, but what are your tasks? So you can so the students can understand more of what a job like yours really means.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of like dimensions to it. So one thing that really uses my anthropology major in a way that I probably didn't anticipate is really guiding a lot of the research on our product. So in product development, there's this whole world of user experience and design research, and that's really like applying qualitative research methods to really understand how people use technology. So, in my field and in my work at Sloan Kettering, like we have a team of researchers that I oversee to do research on our product. So, they're doing things like interviewing patients about, how they navigate their cancer care, to understand like, well, what are features that we can build into our digital platforms for patient care to, better serve them. So, part of it is like kind of spearheading that research and data collection that like pulls us back into like things that can go into the product. Other parts of it is really like meeting with our stakeholders. So like in a hospital, we have so many disciplines, from like clinicians, like like doctors and medicine, nursing, we have like admin staff, ambulatory care, and all of those different groups have different stakes in our products that interface with patients. So, a lot of what I do is like meet with different stakeholders to understand like what do they need technology to do, what are the pain points that they face, like, what are things they think patients could benefit from, and use that to build into a strategy. And then the third like thing that I really do day to day is like condense that information, or like really be the center point for a lot of that kind of like vision and direction for the product, and turn that into more like discrete tasks that development teams can work on. So, I have a counterpart that oversees like a team of engineers and developers, and we work together to break down like, okay, here's what the business needs, here's what the design needs are, and like then in turn like put that into a roadmap for actual developers to like make it come to life.
That's great. That's really helpful. Sahil, do you want to go next? You're on mute.
Sorry about that, technical challenges. So every day is kind of a unique challenge, which is the fun part of this job. But there's like a couple buckets of items that you can expect. One is meeting with different kinds of healthcare stakeholders. Healthcare stakeholders is a broad term that we kind of just use to refer to different folks in the healthcare system, from patient advocates to payers to healthcare providers. Meeting with them, understanding their perspective, understanding what concerns they're facing while they're providing or interacting with the healthcare system. Another big part of my job is researching healthcare policy proposals and then identifying ways to turn that into a legislative item. So that can be a bill, that can be an amendment, that can be, action item like a congressional letter or something like that. A good chunk of my job also goes towards preparing the member for different types of committee events. So that can include things like hearings, which is basically when a congressional committee comes together. The members will ask different witnesses, which are usually experts in certain policy areas, questions, trying to understand what the issues are in that policy area, what are some solutions on how we can address it. Then we have things called markups, which is basically when legislation will come before the committee. The committee might amend it, the committee might discuss it, the committee might get into a fight about it. So that can be fun sometimes. Preparing for those, and then another big part of my job is just recommending to the member how they should vote or how they should interact with a piece of legislation. So that can be going down to the House floor to talk about why it's good or why it's bad or how it's going to be impactful for his or her constituents, providing a recommendation if they should vote up or down on it. So those are kind of the different sorts of tasks and responsibilities that I have on a day-to-day basis.
Perfect. Thank you. Sunny.
All right. I think there's pieces of Laura's job and pieces of Sahil's job that I also do on a daily basis. A lot of the job that I do, I think threefold. So, I think similar to Laura, each project, there's a direction and the vision of the project that we're trying to take forward to aid the growth of not only Becton Dickinson, but to help out our customers who are the major health systems in a way that leaves the most impact. And in order to do that, there's quite a bit of cross-functional collaboration necessary across many different players within Becton Dickinson and outside of Becton Dickinson, so our customer groups. So bringing those voices together requires many, many meetings. So kind of facilitating those meetings, making sure the right meetings are taking place, making sure the right stakeholders are in place, and making sure that walking out of that meeting, we have met the goal that we're trying to meet. That kind of facilitation is a huge piece of my job. Second, it would be pretty heavy data analysis. Honestly, this was not my forte. Graduating from college, and then even my first year of consulting. But I think I quickly learned to really dive deep into the data to find the nuggets of wisdom that we need to pick out to further the progress of the project. So a huge chunk of my job is data analysis using many different kind of mediums. And I think thirdly, also for any kind of effort that we have, there's a bit of benchmarking effort as well in terms of what our competitors are doing. So there's a lot of interviews with the experts who may know the landscape of the health tech industry, and also just more of secondary research as well on my part to understand what's going on in the field. And lastly, I would say I am involved in the sales process as well. So traveling to where our customers are, which are many times the C-suites of health systems, and kind of talking through the products and the value position that Becton Dickinson can bring in order for the health systems to meet their unique goals. So those are kind of the main work streams that I participate in on a daily basis.
Great, thank you all. Well, I'm going to ask one more question, but I hope that all the other participants start asking some questions. Again, you can, after this question, you can ask in person, or you want to put some in chat. I also would encourage you, maybe, you're trying to get a workout, at the same time, but if you're not, turn your camera on so that we can have a dialogue here too, and it's not just the panel speaking to names. So if you feel comfortable, it'd be great to see everybody's faces. But my next question to you all is, if there's anything that surprised you, once you entered into this industry, anything that surprised you that you think would be helpful to share with the students?
Well, for me, I don't think I really knew that like a big part of my industry existed. And maybe because a lot of what I'm doing is like fairly new and emergent, but I think particularly when it comes to like the user experience and design and research aspect of my work, like, back when I was a student, I really struggled to think about like, how could I best apply my like qualitative research skills into a career? And like, does it mean just working in academia, or is there anything else? And I feel like it took me a while to realize that there was this whole other field that was like kind of using those exact same skills, but applying them to more of an industry, which to me was really exciting because that means things moving at a faster pace. It means things getting into people's hands. It means like a bit more of a connection to the real world. So that was like something that was eye-opening, to have that kind of like moment where it clicked of like, wow, here's like, all of these methodologies and like things that I really enjoy. But they actually are kind of being used in like a private sector setting in a way that I hadn't anticipated.
Yeah, there's just so many careers out there that we're unaware of, right? All right, Sunny or Sahil?
Yeah, I think one thing that really surprised me was, and I think this is more of a nice thing, is that how much I used my degree from Georgetown, actually. So like, I was in the healthcare management policy program, for those of you that joined us a little later. But like literally every class, every, book that I read helps me every day, understand what's going on. It helped me, provide me with a nice foundation into how the healthcare system works, who are the different players, how they interact with one another, and also provide a nice overview of the different, legislative processes that go on. So like, I think it's really informative. What you learn in the classroom can help like shape in terms of like what you're interested in, what you want to, use, and like, finding a career that enables you to leverage the skills you learn in the classroom later on is always, a nice, bonus.
Yeah, and to play off of Sahil's perspective a little bit, it definitely, being also a healthcare management policy graduate, I used a lot of the things that I learned in classroom. in my daily job activities. But I think one thing that's really stuck out to me, in this working world is like learning never stops, right? So just how much upkeep I have to do in order to stay ahead of this fast moving industry. I think healthcare, as Laura said, there's so much innovation in so many different sectors. And when we say healthcare, it's med tech, it's providers, it's health insurance payers, but there's so many different, even non-traditional players like Amazon entering the field. So I feel like just constant learning is so critical to stay ahead. I mean, I listen to relevant podcasts all the time. I read newsletters religiously. That's how I start my days in order to be a valuable contributor in meetings that I mentioned earlier on. And that's just a really critical piece because, right now, I don't know what your majors are, students on this call, and you may be something that's completely unrelated to health, when you take a step back and kind of look at what you're doing in your classrooms. But I think, it's also important to keep in mind that the learning continues. And I think also what you pick up on your first job, that also carries deeply into the job that you will do in your second job and third job and such. So just continuing to learn, I think, and the critical nature of that was perhaps the surprise that I had.
And just to add one thing to what Sunny said, I think the fun of healthcare, in addition to it being fast paced and always being on the cutting edge, is that it pulls on a lot of different fields. So if you're interested in economics, there's a role for you. If you're interested in social sciences, there's a role for you. Every day, you're pulling on multiple disciplines to work in healthcare. It's not just like the biological sciences, or it's not just the social sciences. It's you need to have strong language skills. You need to be able to analyze data sets, things like that. So it's a multidisciplinary field in itself.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to ask another question. Still, again, students, put your questions in. But given the times of where we're at, where diversity and inclusion is important, always important, but especially important right now. What trends are you seeing in the field? And would you say that your company, what kinds of things do they do to support diversity initiatives and really make sure that they are welcoming all from different backgrounds?
I can start. So like in terms of where I work now, like I think Sloan Kettering is doing, kind of what a lot of companies are doing in this time, which is like they're hosting a lot of listening sessions, a lot of town halls, and right now just like hearing from staff like where they think they need to improve. And I think frankly, it's like too early to tell what will come of that, and if there actually will be like tangible outcomes or improvements. But in terms of the state of the overall industry, like one thing that I've noticed as a trend, so before I joined Sloan Kettering, I spent, a number of years working in this research consulting group where I was really working with startups and investors a lot. And I think, one persistent trend is just like the lack of representation in the startup space, especially in terms of like which companies get invested in, partnered with, scaled up. And I think that's like, a problem that persists and doesn't really go away. One thing that I felt like was really encouraging that I was able to do just in my own work was, so like one of the projects that I ran for a few years was actually running a startup incubator with the city of New York. So we worked with the city basically to distribute funds to early stage companies. And we were actually able to like turn that trend on its head. And by the end of the program, after 3 years, I think 75% of our founders were female founded. And we also had a really large like representation of different races and just like diversity overall. And I think for me, like the really big factor into how we were able to achieve that success was who was on the other side of the table, right? So like our decision-making team really was also diverse in itself. And I think that led us to, maybe remove some of those like biases that other groups or more traditional investment funds have. So kind of reflecting on that, like I would urge companies like even where I work now at MSK to really think about inclusion in our leadership and representation in our leadership, like all the way to the top and through our board as well. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for, like what I hope comes out of the efforts that are underway and the conversations underway at MSK right now.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And can hope for that on the Hill as well.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple of things. At the start of this Congress, the Speaker Pelosi and Majority Leader Steny Hoyer got together and created something called the House Diversity Inclusion Office, which basically tries to promote staff of color to different leadership positions on the Hill, whether that's, committee staff positions or that's, leadership staff, et cetera. So that's been something that's been introduced relatively new. And then just in general, though, like on the Hill, the conversations around racial health disparities in the healthcare system has something that's been going on for some while, but really starting to pick up traction now. You're starting to see, folks on both sides of the aisle come together, identify legislation, transformative legislation to help address some of the systemic issues that we've, seen come to light recently.
And just really quick to follow up, do you feel like there's some reception to those different policies?
Yeah, I think, we are in a unique moment in our nation's history, and folks are coming to the conversations are happening that need to happen, at least on the Hill. So I think, we're going to see something really substantial come out in the next, year or so.
And Sunny, what do you think about in terms of the consulting and medical device industry? Where do they fall?
Sure. I think a couple of things. I think consulting companies, especially, there's been a lot of just, I think, effort to what Laura said, put more in diverse representation into the leadership positions. I think every time there is a promotion decision announced and people's faces all come up in terms of who's gotten promoted, there's always discussion as to how much representation is there that has reached the leadership positions. And I think the leadership is definitely taking a proactive approach in order to address those concerns that comes from within the company and from the outside of the company as well. I think in Becton Dickinson, couple of things, including the leadership representation, but also as a company that looks to further the health of everyone. It really, what it's trying to do is in our testing of products that we put out into the market, making sure that in that research process that the population that we test out the products with is a broad representation as well, so that when the products hit the market, that we've really incorporated many different kind of voices in order to make sure that the product speaks to as many people as possible.
Sunny, I can echo that. I think that's a great point. Like bias in product design is a real thing. And I think doing things like making sure you're researching in like a broad population is so important. Right. Like I even see that in my day-to-day. Like one example is like, we have a patient portal, but it's only available in English. So, that means limiting access to people who speak other languages. And I think we need to start thinking about how we can infuse approaches like what you just described to make sure that those needs are represented when we're designing technology.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Well, we have a few questions. So Kira and anybody else, if I repeat your question and they're unsure, please speak up. But Kira was wondering, related to what Sahil was saying, do you find you are expected to have a science background or knowledge for public health jobs?
Oh, so you want me to take a stab at that one?
Mm-hmm.
It is very helpful. One thing I will say, if you're in a health policy job on the Hill specifically, what you focus on is dependent on the members' legislative priorities. So for example, if your member is really focused on bringing new therapeutics, promoting innovation in the healthcare space, then you're going to need a heavy science background. But on the other hand, if your member is more interested on expanding healthcare coverage, for example, then you need to know more about Medicare, Medicaid, Children's Health Insurance Program, et cetera. But in terms of roles outside the government in the advocacy space, so say if you work for like a patient advocacy group focused on a particular disease like the American Cancer Society, it's really good to have a general understanding of the biological sciences, because you're going to be interacting with pharmaceutical companies that are working with you to help identify areas that need additional research, and they might be talking about some of their cutting edge technology or cutting edge therapeutics, and if you're not able to understand like what a basic protein is, you're going to get lost in the conversation. So it's always helpful to have a basic understanding of the sciences. You don't need to be go out and take organic chem, but maybe taking human biology 101 would be fantastic.
Great. Kira, let me know if you want to follow up, or if Sunny and Laura, if you want to add to that.
Yep. Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, so another question. How does one get experience in some of those less mainstream health careers? So how do you get experience in less mainstream health careers? You know, I mean, you can take consulting, for example. It's hard to get internships in consulting, and, you know, certainly user experience, there aren't, you know, a ton of internships, let alone you can get experience on the Hill, but will it be specific to health, right? So how do you get experience, you know, that can really translate?
I mean, I definitely encourage people to, like, especially look to the startup space to get some sort of exposure to that. And I think that there's a lot of like really early stage and emerging companies out there that, you know, because they're so small, they often do need a lot of support. So I would say, like, it might not be the most like name brand company out there, but you know, working with a smaller stage health tech company is a really good way to just like learn a little bit about that side of the industry and get some exposure to, like, you know, what is the kind of like entrepreneurship world like what is the technology world like. And I also think there's like a growing community for that kind of stuff. I don't know how that will fare, or like how that experience will be virtually. But at least in New York, like, there's so many places that you can go, like events or meetups, or groups that are really focused on things like user experience in healthcare, and like a really great community of people kind of sharing opportunities or sharing, you know, education. And I think for me, that's been a good way to like learn from others and like really understand the landscape. So that's something I would recommend, like, especially if you're kind of homebound right now and like looking for ways to learn, you know, at least looking into like what sort of like online community events are out there could be a good start.
Great.
So in a normal world, I would recommend obviously trying to intern with the federal government in some sort of capacity. With that said, those internships are very competitive, very cutthroat. But the thing to remember about health policy is it's not done in a vacuum. The Hill and the federal government are just one aspect of it. There's a huge health policy committee made up of advocates, providers, payers, innovators. So with that being said, if you're interested, you know, being in DC, I know a lot of the leading health policy advocates have, you know, virtual internships available. So think like American Public Health Association, some of the trade associations like the American Hospital Association, American Cancer Society, the list goes on and on. But basically, there's still ways to get health policy experience without being on the Hill or in the federal government.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, I think that students, you know, often you don't know what professional associations are and trade associations, and those are great ways. And it's basically, you know, organizations where their goal is to train professionals in the field and keep them to their ethics and those kinds of things. And so those are great organizations that do policy, a lot of great health related careers. Sunny, do you have any advice on how to get, you know, experience if one's interested in the biotech world or health consulting?
It's a tough question given this environment. I have to say, you know, in consulting, I mean, I followed the path of getting an internship with PwC after my junior year at Georgetown, and then continued on that path with Boston Consulting Group. It was also through internship when I was pursuing my MBA. And I know that Becton Dickinson also has an internship program. So internships are leveraged quite heavily in consulting space as well as the biotech space. I know that internships are quite difficult to get your hands on right now, but from, you know, my general job search experience that I've had and my friends have gone through, even though these companies may not be offering internships right now, I found that even just requesting coffee chats with people who are already working for the companies that you are kind of aiming for, just continuing to build that relationship, keeping those connections warm, so that when the internships are once again hitting the market, that those companies are familiar with you. There's somebody within the company who can speak for you. You know, that's kind of a long-term approach, but something that may be helpful, you know, kind of thinking about the future.
To the students who asked those questions, do you have any follow-up questions to that before I move on to a different type of question? Okay. So this is for Sahil. One student is interested in health policy, but I know getting entry-level jobs in the Hill can be super competitive. Do you have any specific advice on how to apply for health policy internships or jobs? And I think that, you know, is a question for Annie and Laura too, in terms of just, you know, how to apply and any tips in the application process.
So health policy jobs on the Hill are just in general across the board?
This is for entry-level jobs on the Hill. Well, then it says to apply to health policy internships or jobs.
Okay, I'll just do it just both. On the Hill, the unfortunate reality is that you're likely not going to be doing health policy in your first job. You kind of have to go work through the administrative track, and then, you know, you get to jump to the leg side. So your first 2 years are either a staff assistant or a legislative correspondent, and you might be able to assist like the principal health policy advisor, but you're not going to be driving the agenda. So if you want to get into a space where you have the opportunity to help out, you always try to intern for a member who's on a committee of jurisdiction. So for example, on the House side, there are a couple of committees that regulate healthcare programs. So there's the Energy and Commerce Committee, there's the Ways and Means Committee, and there's appropriations. So if I was someone coming out of college right now and I wanted to eventually work in health policy, you know, a couple of years down the road, I would try to intern or work for a member who was on one of those committees, because then that member has exposure and that member has the ability to inform health policy. Generally speaking, if you want to, you know, jump into health policy right after graduation, it's always great to go to one of those advocacy groups, those trade associations, those professional societies, because there it's a little bit more horizontal in terms of who gets to do what. So like to apply for those jobs, the best thing to do is, you know, there's a lot of great Hoyas out there. So use Hoya Gateway to connect with them, and they can help you, you know, get set up and interviews and all that stuff. The best thing to do when you're applying for a health policy job is to make sure and talk a little bit about some of the health policy experiences you've had, whether that's taking a course, you know, or if you did an externship or something, or did a project, anything that shows that you have some sort of like understanding of the basics of health policy. That's going to help separate you from the other candidates who are just, you know, blasting cover letters all over the place. So like being able to tie yourself to the health policy sector in some way is always a great way to separate yourself and get your foot in the door for those entry-level positions.
Great. Sunny or Laura, do you have anything to add in terms of that question, advice for applying?
Yeah, I would say, you know, for the hospital that I work at now, like one thing that's been eye-opening to me is that people really stay there for their whole careers. And I see a lot of people that joined Sloan Kettering entry level, you know, working in clinics as like care coordinators or doing other kind of like entry level administrative work, and really grow their way kind of to the place they want to be in that way. So that's something that I would have never thought of as like a non-healthcare, like non-clinical student at Georgetown, is like, oh, you know, I can kind of seek out these entry-level kind of like non-clinical jobs in clinics and really use that to grow my way into, you know, say like working in health tech in a hospital, working in research in a hospital. So that was sort of like something interesting for me to realize. And then the other thing, like, you know, working in research and working in user experience, I have a lot of entry-level staff that I work with. And I think, you know, sometimes people think that if they don't have like that exact perfect thing on their resume from college, they won't get looked at or considered. And, you know, for me, like, it's great if I have an applicant who's worked, you know, with a startup before, or who's worked with a hospital before. But for those entry-level jobs, for me, like, I also think the soft skills are just as important. So, you know, it's great if you worked at a hospital, but if you were just like, you know, analyzing hard data and I need you to be interfacing with patients, like I might be more interested in someone who's shown that they can kind of be interfacing with the public, or, you know, having like a like that kind of dialogue with people. So I would say, like, don't like worry or beat yourself up if you don't feel like you have that exact thing on your resume, especially for those entry level positions, because sometimes I think what the skills are might not be as apparent, just like, you know, on what the job description says.
Great. Sunny, do you have anything to add?
No, I mean, I think I agree with Laura in that same with medtech industry as well. A lot of people kind of start in many different departments that may not require as much close clinical knowledge, such as legal, finance, operations, marketing. And, I think those are kind of good ways to enter the organization if you have relevant skill sets that you can show from your casework or any kind of volunteer work that you've done, and then growing your knowledge within the healthcare space, by those jobs. I think that's a great way of growing up in the industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned networking before too. I'd like to say the ideal is to not lead with your resume. If you're not leading with your resume, you're leading with that relationship. Then in those soft skills, then that will help. So another question is, what resources, classes do you wish you would have took advantage of at Georgetown? Thanks, Jessica. Got them all thinking.
I can think of one actually, and I actually don't know the name of the class, so maybe students will have to help me. But I remember a couple of my friends from the MSB took a class, I believe it was part of OPIM, and it was very heavy Excel analysis class. And I felt that within my major, yes, there was some data analysis components, but we didn't dive as deep as maybe I would have liked to. And I think if I had taken a class that had allowed me to kind of really dig deep into the data, that was based on like demos or kind of a scenario planning, that would have really helped me hit the ground running in consulting and also in medtech, because that's a big piece of my job right now and has always been.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. Like in my master's program, I took an Excel course, and I always tell people it's the most valuable class I've ever taken because, you inevitably will need to do some sort of like quick and dirty analysis, and the stuff that you can do if you know how to use Excel can really get you there really fast. So that's probably the like most tangible skill from school that I find myself using day to day.
Sorry. I think one class that I would have taken that I wish I had is probably something to do with like budgetary analysis. In the government, we're always dealing with really big budgets, and there's a lot of different line items, and just trying to understand how programs are funded. I think it would have been helpful to understand a little bit more about how budgets are put together and financial modeling and planning. So I think that's one skill set I wish I had developed a little bit more in college.
Well, for many of you who are looking for something this summer, I'm sure LinkedIn Learning offers, or Coursera offers Excel and budget type courses. So check that out. I think that's great. Great advice. All right, this is from William. Given the complexity and depth of healthcare and global health issues, how do you work with people who don't have the knowledge you all do on healthcare?
I think that's a really important question. I think to me, like one of the key pieces to be successful in this kind of work is to be able to communicate well and to be able to kind of be able to put yourself in other people's perspectives and understand like what information are they operating with, like what level of literacy are they operating with, like what do they know, what are they coming to the table expecting, to really understand what they need to hear to really understand like what you're all about. So I think for me, another thing that I did at Georgetown was take on an English major. And I actually do feel like that helped set me apart in this industry, like being able to write well, being able to like understand what information people need to really get what you're saying. I think that's helped me go far. And that's also kind of like a known problem in healthcare where, you have all this scientific information, but you need to be able to communicate it to everybody and all kinds of perspectives. So like I think even being conscious of that is a good first step to being able to do it well.
Yeah, and just to echo what Laura said, meeting people and stakeholders where they are, because one day, at least on the Hill, like, you're meeting with a constituent who only understands, their disease because they're advocating for that, for example, like cancer or something like that, but they don't understand the other complexities of the healthcare system. Whereas the next day you're dealing with the secretary of HHS. So being able to understand where people are and being able to meet them where they are and being able to communicate with them is an absolute essential skill in healthcare because you're dealing with different players all the time.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit. I think I leverage kind of pre-reads extensively. So if I kind of think about, okay, for this particular meeting, these folks are coming to the meeting, and I know, let's say a lot of people are coming from the finance department within my company, but this project requires a bit of more of a broader healthcare knowledge. I will usually try to find some kind of a pre-read that's out there, so I don't have to spend my time creating the pre-read, or if not, then I will pull together some information that's helpful and send it out to the group beforehand. So they will at least get to kind of get a quick read for 15 minutes or so, and they can come ready to discuss some of the topics that may require a little bit of a deeper knowledge.
Fabulous, thank you. It looks like we've gone through all the questions. Does anybody have another question before we go on to the next portion of this, which will be breakout rooms? Looks like not, so kind of going once, going twice. All right, so Beth, if you could lead us through the next activity, that'd be great.
All right, thank you, Jody. Yes, so the next portion of this, we're actually going to break you all into some breakout rooms. And what our goal is each of the alumni are going to take one of the breakout rooms. So there'll be 3 of them. And the goal is that we're going to talk a little bit about what this last question really got to and what are some of the skills that are necessary for success. And in some pre-meetings we had on the topic, we identified a couple different skills. One is knowledge of the field, which we've talked about. Another is using that hypothesis-driven approach that you learn in many of your coursework, whether that's biology class or chemistry class, and bringing that hypothesis-driven approach to your problem solving in your career. And the last one, Laura touched on this when you were talking about communicating well, is that skill of having empathy. And what does that mean to bring empathy into the workplace? So what I'm going to do is I am going to break you up a little bit randomly into your group. And Sahil will be talking about knowledge of the healthcare field and how you can better cultivate that knowledge. Sunny will talk about that hypothesis-driven approach, and Laura will talk about empathy. If you are in a group, I encourage you to stay there and learn about that skill. However, you can also come back to the main meeting and ask me to be put into a different group, and I can send you to a different classroom. So we'll probably do that for the next 20 to 30 minutes or so, and come back around 5:20 to just close out as a group. All right, so if everyone can just give me a few moments to get you all set. So, all right. Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, you should have an email, so feel free to accept that.
The panelists could just share any takeaways from your conversation, and maybe each of you could end with last piece of advice. Of course, if anybody has any lingering questions after the breakouts, feel free to put that in there too. But for the panelists, just a little bit, if you could share a little bit about your conversation and any last advice that you have for the students.
I think I'll just add, we had a great discussion about, different career options in the health policy space. And we talked about how it's not just limited to the federal government and some of the skills that you need to succeed in the health policy space. I think one thing that I would just recommend to the larger group is, it's just always important to follow what you're interested in, especially in something like health policy, given that it's so diverse. Don't feel like you need to limit yourself to one area. You can always move around and feel free to explore. I think that's one of the more fun things about health policy. It's an ever-changing, but unique field that pulls on so many different disciplines.
I can go next. Yeah, so it was really nice to meet the ladies in my breakout room. I can really see a bright future for all of them. Just kind of talking through, what are some of the specific characteristics that we are looking for in our next job, and what are our strengths, so that when the opportunities kind of come our way for the next steps in our careers, or even for our first jobs, being able to evaluate those opportunities because you have those kind of lists of what you're looking for very specifically. I think that's some of the things that we talked about. I think in overall, to everyone on this call, it is a tough market. It is an interesting times that we live in right now. But I think what is encouraging is that employers, at least the ones that I've currently worked for, and also talking to my friends who work for a variety of different industries and employers, I think we are all very aware that we're all in this together, that students are having a particularly difficult time building out their portfolio and their resumes, because simply it's different times. So I wouldn't be too anxious. I think once this too shall pass, and when it does, I think you'll find that the industry will be very understanding, and industries will know that there were shortage of some options that have been available in the past generations. So good luck to all of you, and I think the industries are definitely waiting for you guys with open arms.
Yeah, I can echo that. Having kind of gone through something somewhat similar myself in 2008, in the time it seemed very uncertain, but reflecting on it, we all kind of landed. So I have hopes for you guys that things will bounce back in some way. But in our call or in our breakout, we talked about empathy and just how you can really connect with different patients and end users to understand what they really need from their product, and how that ties to this bigger theme of inserting human-centered design and just humanity into the technologies that we all use. So I think that's a skill, it's one tangible hard skill to be able to conduct an interview, but I think that also kind of ripples out to your ability to communicate in other ways and synthesize information, and then also really navigate negotiation and talking to stakeholders as well.
Really like how all three of you offer prior to this meeting. We'll use all
Hang on, Jody, we are losing you. Oh, it looks like we...
Oh no!
Okay, you're back. You're back.
Okay, well, I don't know what you missed, but I love the skills that you all provided, and I love that they're all different, and yet you all are using them, all three of them, I think, all of you. And just want to thank the students for your participation, your questions, and sounds like participating quite grade on it, but it was sent to you in your email, so feel free to take a moment to reflect on what you learned today. And Beth, is there anything else that they can do with that? Just want to make sure.
No, I think we'll send out some of the thoughts and a little bit of reflection, and we just encourage you, especially as you have time over the summer, to take time set aside to reflect on either, if you have some of the experiences and the skills that our panelists were talking about, how can you convey that, whether that's through a resume or a cover letter or networking, or if, it's something where you want to gain some skills. Our panelists today talked about, getting some skills in health sciences or biological sciences, looking ahead at the rest of your career at Georgetown and looking at what are some ways, either through courses or some of your extracurricular activity, that could you gain some of that experience. So we just encourage you to take that time to reflect over the summer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you. Let's give a round of applause to our three panelists. Thank you so much for sharing your insight. We really appreciate it. Mm-hmm. We learned a lot. I learned a lot myself. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to do this.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you. Good night.
Bye.